Now, what the Cyclades are most known for are these Cycladic figurines. We have sort of two categories. You see the early Cycladic 1 ones are the ones on the top, and the early Cycladic 2 are the ones on the bottom. The early ones are very schematic, very sort of abstract. You can't really see the human form, and as they progress, they begin to take on much more of a human form. The main types are the ones that we see in the lower part there, which are what are called the folded arm types. You notice how they all have the arm folded one over the other, and this is typical of these types of Cycladic figurines. This is an example of one. They have particular features. They have a head that leans slightly backwards, an oval face, pronounced ridge for the nose, a very long neck, sloping shoulders, abbreviated arms one over the other, slim hips, and legs bent at the knees. You see how they still are very abstract. They never really have great details in terms of the human form. So, now one big question associated with these figurines is exactly what are they meant to portray? You can see a couple of different examples on the left there. One thing that we know is that they are designed in a way so that they cannot actually stand. The way we're looking at them here, they're obviously sort of up in the air, but when museums actually put them on display, the feet, which are actually pointed, have to be put with a mount in order to stand, which seems to imply that maybe they were never meant to be standing. So if we actually lay the pieces down, where you see there on the right there, it gives us a good possibility that some of these figures were actually meant to be images of pregnant females. If you notice that the hands that rest on all the examples where you have the arm over the arm, they're actually resting on a slightly protruding belly. And when you see it laying down there, you can see that it's possible that these figurines are in fact that of a pregnant female. A couple of other examples that exist are these types of harp players. So a lyre is a type of harp. There are 8 well-preserved examples of these. All the known examples that come from secure contexts or from excavations share a few common elements. The musician is sitting on a seat of either a chair with an elaborate back or a simple stool. The back of the figurine is straight, head is held high. He's holding his instrument in his right side. It is sitting on his thigh. The feet are carved next to each other, and they're actually the soles themselves are parallel to the ground and supporting the actual figure. And the harp itself is sort of a delicate, very tall, bowed frame, generally rising outside of a sound box. Now, the example that we see here, you can see we're looking at it from the right, and in almost all the examples, the focus has been to basically do all the details on the right side. Now, this might seem as insignificant details that I'm giving you here, but the reason I'm explaining them to you is because we have one example that the Metropolitan Museum of Art has, which is sort of problematic. So this one, there are a couple of areas that, as you can see, are not quite corresponding to what we described. The back of the seat, you might recall, looks different. He's not standing straight. The feet themselves are not down to the ground, actually supporting the statue. The figure, as we're looking at it here, it's holding the lyre on the right side, but is actually done in a way where the sound box itself is not on the thigh, and therefore sort of freestanding in a way that wouldn't actually allow sound to be resonated properly. You'll also notice the facial features are very different in this one than the ones that we've seen. The anatomical details of the figure itself, so there's more muscle, there's more detail, more realistic detail to the figure. All these features make this particular one sort of stand out, these sort of details that we can see here. When we compare the two side by side, the one on the right is the one from the island of Kiros, and the one on the left is the Metropolitan Museum of Art one. You can see that they are very, very different. Now, the reason I bring this one up is because many scholars, myself included, believe that the lyre player from the Met could in fact be a forgery, a modern replica of an ancient Cycladic figurine. And the reason that this is believed is because it is so dramatically different than any of the known examples that come from excavations. So to think that an artist could have created something so very different as this one is sort of a little bit open to question. So something food for thought there. Now the one on the right, the lyre player, was found in a tomb along with a couple of other musicians, including this one, which is a flute player. So you can see that in addition to the figurines that we saw of the folded arm type, we do occasionally get sort of other examples, other types, like these two musicians that we have from this particular tomb, and these are male examples. One question is how much sort of design pre-thought has gone into these figures. You can see this particular one has the drawing on the right of the actual figure, and this particular one follows curves. So different types of figurines are going to follow different types of patterning. This one, everything fits into a circle. So the lower part of the belly, the upper part of the head, the lower part of the feet, the knees, everything sort of fits into a schematic that follows a circle. Here are a couple of other examples where you see they could either follow a schematic of a circle or they could be straight lines instead of straight line proportions here. One other question is, do we actually have ratios? Do we have a 1 to 3, a 1 to 4 ratio? You can see these examples here that seem to potentially follow some sort of design in terms of how big the figures are going to be. Did the ancient artists of the Cyclades actually have these kind of canonic divisions, these proportions in mind when they made the figurines, or are we trying to read too much into the actual figurines? Again, question to think about. Now, one interesting feature about these figurines is that they have inspired modern art. This poster comes from an exhibition in 2006 in the museum in Athens, Cycladic Museum in Athens, and it's an exhibition called Shaping the Beginning, and it looks at how particular artists, Brancusi, Giacometti, Matisse, Moore, Picasso, Rodin, Derain, were inspired by Cycladic figurines in their own modern art. This particular quote here is a Pablo Picasso one, and it says, there was a little man in the Cyclades. He wanted to make a piece of sculpture. He thought he was making the great goddess. Nothing remains of his life, nothing of his kind of gods, nothing. What remains is this, a piece of sculpture, because he wanted to make a piece of sculpture. Kind of an abstract quote here. The point of the quote that I'm showing you here is that people like Picasso and many other artists saw the pieces just for art's sake. So you see that last part he describes, nothing remains of his life, nothing of his kind of gods, right? And for Picasso, it's kind of insignificant. All he cares about is that this particular artist wanted to make a piece of sculpture, and therefore he's looking at it from an artistic sort of perspective without looking to see the context of the piece. We talked about at the very, very beginning of the semester how important context is for archaeology. The figurines we've been looking at, we don't know if they come from tombs, if they come from settlements, if they come from temples, and that's because most of them do not have context. They've been looted, they've been robbed from wherever they were originally placed and brought to the markets. So the reasons these things happen, and the reason looting generally happens, is because there is a market for the objects themselves. And this modern art movement, where you have artists like Henry Moore here, you see the 1940s, this is a piece called The Sculptural Objects. The figure on the right in that particular piece is inspired by a Cycladic figurine. Here we have Brancusi, torso of a young girl, 1922. His is the one on the left. There's the head of a Cycladic figurine, inspired by the Cycladic figurine, his modern sculpture of a young girl. A sketch here by Modigliani. A profile view of one of our figures like this could actually look like. So some of these artists actually own Cycladic figurines, others had just seen Cycladic figurines, but what begins to happen is that if they begin to be talked about in these sort of artistic circles, everybody then wants a Cycladic figurine. So when we look at the fine spots of Cycladic figurines, we know that there are probably just under a couple of thousand figurines that have come to light. Many of these just appear in collections. This is from one of the articles that I've posted online, where it basically looks at where figurines have been discovered. These are the ones that have actually been found in context, so in graves or in settlements. And it's a very, very small number here. When we think about that, we have roughly under 2,000 figurines that have been discovered or that are in museum or collections, and you're looking at these numbers here that are just just over 100 figurines. You get an idea that the majority of the figurines that are in collections today, we do not have a context for. This is another example of objects that come from North American collections, so North American museum collections and private collections. And you'll notice that the majority of them, 59 in this case out of 92, come from unknown context, so we don't know where they actually came from. Of the 1600, therefore, only 10% come from secure contexts. When we look at the increase of figurines, Cycladic figurines from major European and US collections, you'll notice that particularly, for example, in the US, they begin to become popular in the 1920s, 1960s, 70s, 80s, we see that they begin to increase. In the UK, it's earlier, it's the 1800s, but the total numbers that we have here, 168 included in United Kingdom, Germany, United States. That if you look at those US numbers, it's after these art movements begin to happen that will create a want, a need for these figurines. To look at some more recent sales, this is from 2008, a Cycladic figurine that went on auction at Sotheby's, was estimated to go for 300 to 500,000 US dollars, ended up selling for $1,022,500. And another one here, this is from Christie's, one of the other major auction houses. This particular one went on sale in 2010, expected to bring in 3 to 5 million, ended up bringing in $16,882,500. So this goes to show that there's still a market for these pieces. Now, they can be legally auctioned and sold if they have been in circulation, as we said before the 1970s. This is when the UN laws were passed. And as long as there is a market for these things, then there will be those that will loot them, that will steal them, that will rob them. And now, luckily, museum laws prohibit, for the most part, for these types of pieces to be bought unless the paperwork is legit and is actually there. So hopefully that will deter people from actually looting and robbing graves. Unfortunately, so much has already been done in terms of the damage. The Cycladic Islands, unfortunately, very few cemeteries have been left intact. So one big question is, what was the purpose of these figurines? And we don't really have an answer. They could be gods and goddesses. They could be protective pieces. They could be toys for children. We don't know. The more of these we find in context, the easier it will be to actually be able to understand what their original intended use was.